Well, today we're continuing in the letters of the New Testament with the regulations of leaders within the church. And some have looked at the passages we're going to look at today and said, well, the implied and assumed gender of the leaders is male. Therefore, women are barred from that form of leadership. There's a problem with that. We're going to unpack that right now. So today we're going to look at a couple passages back to back that talk about leadership in the church, some regulations, stipulations given to people who are going to lead within the church. And there's a couple key terms that do mean different components, but they're basically interchangeable. Is the word elder, that's the Greek word presbyter, and the word overseer, which is the Greek word episkopoi, sometimes translated as bishop. And another term that doesn't show up in this page would be the word pastor, which really only shows it like once, or shepherd. So the idea of elder and overseer, those are the two primary terms for leadership in the church. And this brings up a big question that is often brought up when we're talking about women in the church. It appears as though the assumed sex of the leader, of the elder or overseer, is male. And does that mean that Paul assumes that women cannot ever have these roles? So we're going to look at it in two different places because Paul kind of says the same thing twice, but with some different emphases. And so here, if anyone is above reproach, so appointing elders, and then verse 7, for an overseer, as God's steward must be above reproach. He's actually just saying elder means overseer. It's synonymous. But here, the main sticking passage is right here. If anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, his children are believers and not open to charge of debauchery or insubordination. And right here, he must be the husband of one wife. 1 Timothy 3, last video we looked at 1 Timothy 2. He goes right into, this saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectful, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. All right, let's talk about the husband of one wife. In the English, it does seem, you read that and you're like, well, he clearly assumes that an overseer is a man because he's a husband of one wife. He doesn't say a wife of one husband. So case closed, right? That just means that all elders, all overseers have to be male. And it's not actually as simple as that. Let's look at it. The Greek is kind of interesting. I find it's actually just three words. It's in particular order, a one woman man. An elder must be a one woman man, right? Which still, it's still, again, the implied sex of this elder is male, a one woman man, right? This is the subject. The subject of the sentence is the man. He's a one woman man. But the way that, a couple points, just understanding Greek a little bit. Greek can sometimes use word order even more than we use in English to emphasize certain things. And the word order here, I think, is really important. The order always begins, the oneness of this scenario is more important than the maleness or the gender of the elder. The oneness, he's a one woman man. What kind of man is he? He's a one woman man. So really, the emphasis here is on his fidelity within marriage. He can be married to only one person at a time, not that he is a man. The emphasis is on the oneness within marriage. Okay, so that's the first thing to point out. In both of these scenarios, the emphasis is on the oneness, but there is still the fact that he's a one-woman man. Now, I did this deep dive because I also know that Greek, as well as Hebrew, by the way, is a gendered language. And what that means is oftentimes, even more than we do in English, they're going to use certain terms to cover everybody. A clear example is in the New Testament. Every time the phrase brothers shows up, he is always talking about the entire church. And so a lot of translations now add brothers and sisters, right? It's kind of like still colloquially today in English, we say, hey, you guys. Not so much, maybe it's getting out of popularity more and more. But a lot of people still do it, you guys. And what we mean is if we're looking at a room full of men and women and we say, hey guys, we mean everybody, right? We're not just singling out the men. Same thing when he says, dear brothers, he means brothers and sisters. And so that at least adds some precedence here. When he's saying a husband of one man, a one woman man, is he doing the same sort of thing as when Paul says, dear brothers? Now, I looked it up, and in both Greek, Paul's also fluent in Hebrew, thinks in Hebrew. In both Greek and Hebrew, there is literally, there's no other way for him to say this. That was the clincher for me. There is no gender-neutral term for woman or man. Actually, the word woman and man, it's the same word that they use for husband and wife. And so throughout, when you're talking to husbands, he's using the same word for man. When he's talking to wives, he's using the same word for woman. And for either man or woman, there's no generic term. There's no word spouse. There's no word for person. There's a word for people, like a whole people group, but there's no word for person. When you're talking about, you should go andros, man or person. And so here, that is really key, to be honest. There's no way, if he only wanted to emphasize the oneness and wanted to make a gender-neutral statement, which why would he do that in the ancient world? Nobody was worried about that kind of politically correct idea that we have in the modern world. But even if he was, there's no way for him to say it. The term a one spouse person in both Greek and Hebrew literally does not exist. Okay, and so if he wanted to, maybe for our sensibilities in the 21st century, he would have had to make a much longer, bulky sentence that said something like, an elder must be a one woman man or a one man woman, right? He would have had to do something like that. But there's just no way, there's no gender neutral term for spouse or person. And so there, it at least opens up the door to say, this might be the exact same thing as when he greets the church as brothers. Okay? So there's that. An elder must be above reproach, married only once. Might be a better way to translate that. You might think that's not the most airtight argument. I think it actually at least opens the door to understand this in a different way. It's not, I don't think it's as airtight on the other side of the debate as some people have claimed. They look at this and they say, well, in this instance, the sex of the leader is the absolute most important thing. If that was true, if Paul was trying to say elders must be men, he would have said that. He would have said elders must be men. Then he could have added, and that man must be a one-woman man. He doesn't. He never actually emphasizes the sex of the elder. He only emphasizes the oneness of what they do in marriage. And then, just to kind of add to that, in both of these, later in the letter, he's talking about leadership within the church in both Titus and Timothy. And he uses the term again. And so it actually gets obscured in the English. But when you appoint elders in every town, the word elder literally means just older person as well, but it's also kind of a leadership term. But down here in chapter 2, he continues to talk about elders. The English here gets obscured, and they call them older men and older women, but he's talking about, it's the same word, presbyter. So he's talking about elders, must be sober-minded and dignified, and then elders who are women, uses the same word again, should be reverent in their behavior, not slanderers, and they should teach what is good and train young women to love their husbands and children. And so it's an interesting choice by the translators to say, well, up here he's appointing elders, but down here we're going to obscure that to just call them older men and older women, because that term elder means leadership. And so actually, when you see it all in one go, you're like, oh, he's talking about elders. And then he actually does differentiate into elders who are men and elders who are women. So that, I think, actually adds more credence to my argument up here that he's using more of that general you guys approach, but he's talking about everyone. Both men and women who are appointed as elders within the church should live by these standards. The same thing actually happens in Timothy, where he's appointing overseers. And then down here, he uses the term elder again. Do not rebuke an elder man, but encourage him. Elder, again, same word. Elder women should be good mothers, young women, as sisters, all that. And then he goes down here, and then verse 17 differentiates between, he's been talking about elders who are men, elders who are women, and then verse 17, elders who rule. So the term as a generic term can just mean respect your elders, right? Respect the older men, respect the older women. And then among those group of elders, I would argue both men and women, elders who rule become a separate class. Elders who rule will be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. For the scriptures say, don't muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. And so I see no evidence as I read through Titus, through Timothy, that Paul is adamant that this term elder or overseer has to be a man. He's saying, look, an overseer should be married only once. These are all the regulations that they should follow. Within your church, you're going to have elders who are men. You're going to have elders who are women. And some of them are also going to have the actual authority to rule within the church body. So there's a lot going on here, but that's one way that I've come to understand, especially these kind of tricky passages in Titus and Timothy. I hope that's helpful. I would, again, of course, love pushback, feedback, comments, and I'll try to respond to as many as I can. Thanks, everyone.